Some giants of the game are on top for decades, for generations, but for this team their time on the top was brief. But their fall certainly wasn't. Calling them a giant might be a stretch, but I think you'll forgive me for including them, as their downfall is fucking epic. Let's talk about Parma.
Whatsoever I feel has come to light, and whatsoever I thought of became my life. Just when every day seemed to greet me with a smile, sun's about to fade it. Now I'm doing time. Now I'm doing time. 'Cause I fell on black days. I fell on black days.
Now when most people hear the word Parma, they don't think of a football team, but back in the 1990s they are a tasty little side. Getting promoted to Italy's top flight in 1990, they were one of Italy's most successful teams, at a time when Italian football was at its height. They were one of the famous Seven Sisters of Italian football, which was the top 7 sides. It wasn't named after that area of London. They were there along with AC Milan, Inter Milan, Roma, Lazio, Juventus and Fiorentina. Yes, there'll be an episode on them as well one day. Yeah, definitely. So with strong investment from their parent dairy company Parmalat, these sisters were doing it for themselves, and their beautiful kits clothed some of the game's greatest players.
In 1990 they achieved promotion to Serie A, and things really sort of snowballed from there. They got investment from Parmalat, who at the time were this huge business growing out of the city of Parma. And when that investment came in, Parma very quickly shot from being this little provincial club to being one of the foremost powers in Italy.
The 90s saw them win a fuckload of trophies: 2 Coppa Italias, a Super Coppa Italia, 2 UEFA Cups, the European Cup Winners' Cup, and the European Super Cup, when it used to mean something. Now it's a bit of a Mickey Mouse trophy, but you know, nevertheless, they left the 90s with a wealth of trophies and success that you can't take away from them at the moment. However, Parma's success would tail off a bit in the new millennium, as they sold Lilian Thuram and Buffon ahead of the 2001-2002 season, and they ended up finishing 10th. But they still won the Coppa Italia, so you know, that season wasn't a disaster. In the summer they sold their star striker Marco Di Vaio to Juventus, and their star defender Fabio Cannavaro was sold to Inter Milan. But they did get in some great attacking players like Mutu and Adriano. So the 2002-2003 season starts, and they do okay. They lose the Super Cup. They win some games, they lose some games, they do alright, and they finish the season in 5th. In the summer they again sold their best attacking player Adrian Mutu.
Then just hours before the season start, we spent abroad for only the second time to bring in Romanian Adrian Mutu from Parma for 15.8 million.
But they had an incredible replacement lined up, a Portuguese attacker who played for Sporting Lisbon. Yes, Cristiano Ronaldo. Yeah, Parma was set to sign Cristiano Ronaldo for 11 million euros. The deal was all but done. On the 7th of August 2003, Manchester United played Sporting Lisbon in a pre-season friendly, and Cristiano Ronaldo played a blinder. After the game, a few of the Manchester United players, or as they're more commonly known, scum, said to Sir Alex Ferguson, "We gotta sign this geezer." and United eventually signed him for €17 million. So Parma missed out on one of the greatest players of all time. What could have been? What could have been?
No, after the game, I speak. I listen to the boss speak with my agent, and he showed very interesting for me, and I'm very happy, and I say, oh, it's amazing.
Nevertheless, the next season started off well. Going into December, Parma were looking good, and a return to the Champions League looked very possible. But then in December, everything changed. And here is where all the financial bollocks comes in. So skip to the time code on the screen if you're not interested in that. I might get some of these details wrong anyway. But here we go.
Is it a crime? Is it a crime?
For here at Parmalat, the global dairy and food conglomerate, they've been cooking the books and have dished up a fraud of epic proportions. There's a €13 billion black hole in the finances.
So Parmalat, the dairy company that I mentioned previously, who are Parma's parent company, well, at the time they were struggling to pay a £150 million debt bond. Questions arose when they actually decided to issue the bonds, and then they escalated when they failed to repay it. Basically, a debt bond is like an IOU that a company can issue when they might need an influx of cash to cover, most likely, a short-term lack of funds. So if a company's strong, like Parmalat were, then they'll most likely prevail with their cash flow problems, and you'll get your money back with interest. So you can imagine the surprise when Parmalat failed with these repayments when they supposedly had £3.95 billion in cash. Well, it turns out all this time Parmalat were doing a bit of a Frank Reynolds and misreporting their finances. Parmalat were founded by Callisto Tanzi, and they went public in 1990, the year after the Tanzi company purchased Parma. They also purchased several other companies in Brazil, Hungary, Italy and the US. Things looked great, confidence in the company was strong, and the stock price continued to rise. However, don't judge a book by its cover, especially if those books had been cooked. It's been believed that since 1990, Parmalat had actually been altering their records to hide their losses and record profits. Parmalat had 214 subsidiaries in 48 countries. Many of them were shell companies, where they could hide their losses so it wouldn't appear on the main company's balance sheet. They also raised debt financing and recorded it as equity, which is bad, apparently. Not good, not good. All of this gave shareholders a false impression that the company was actually profitable.
What happened with Parmalat was spectacular. They were almost 1% of Italian GDP at a certain point. They employed 36,000 people across the country. And it turned out that there was essentially substantial fraud going on throughout the business, and millions, in fact I think it was billions of euros that were just missing, black holes in the company that weren't there.
I was not surprised that there was a problem at Parmalat. What I knew, their figures worried me quite a lot, but the extent certainly did surprise me very much.
One of their Cayman Island subsidiaries, Bondlat, also forged a bank statement from the Bank of America to make it appear like they had €4 billion and handed that off to their auditors. I don't feel so bad about lying on my Tinder profile now. It's nothing compared to this.
There is the question of industrial assets. Probably Parmalat was probably a good company in terms of its industrial activity. So perhaps it may be saved, but the loss to banks and to those who have invested in their bonds can be very serious.
Italian law states that a company has to change auditors every 7 years to prevent a company's relationship with the auditors getting too close. Well, after Parmalat switched from their auditors Grant Thornton to Deloitte in 1997, they still kept Grant Thornton on in an advisory capacity. Grant Thornton was said to have actually conspired in this corruption, which might be why they were kept on in this advisory capacity past 1997. High-up executives in the Italian office of the Bank of America are also believed to know about the fraud. But they continued to sell Parmalat bonds to investors, as they made good money off the fees.
This week, lawyers representing shareholders presented evidence to the magistrates that Tanzi's Monte Carlo account contained earnings from a secret financial operation. Carlo Zauli says he's tracked down some of the missing billions to an offshore account in the Bank of America, money he says which came from Italian banks. Bank of America has denied the existence of such an account, but Zauli stands by his claim.
On top of all of this, Callisto Tanzi, the company's founder, who looks a little bit like that geezer from MASH, he'd been siphoning off money to fund personal ventures to the total of 800 million euros. There was also some shit with derivatives and hedge funds, but fuck researching all of that. So bringing it back to the debt bonds, alarms were raised on Parmalat's finances. And when their accounts were properly looked into, it was discovered that Parmalat were in £12.8 billion of debt, and the company declared bankruptcy on the 24th of December 2003. Which must have really been a shit Christmas in the Tanzi household. This would be the largest fraud in European financial history. It was called Europe's Enron. It may have even been worse than Enron, worse than Jarrett Gold even. When all was said and done, Parmalat's collapse caused massive job losses, a massive loss of faith in the Italian stock market, and several prison sentences, including one for the founder Callisto Tanzi, who was sentenced to 18 years for market rigging, false accounting and fraud. We also got the cost of life of Callisto Tanzi's right-hand man, 32-year-old father of two, Alessandro Bazzi. He sadly took his own life by jumping off a bridge. So back to football. Needless to say, Parma Football Club were fucked, as Parmalat owns 98.7% of the club. Parma Football Club would go into bankruptcy, and administrators gave them 2 months to find a new buyer.
After the Parmalat crack, Parma was in controlled administration.
3 multinational companies turned them down, which were Barilla, Parma Cotto and Consorzio del Prosecuto di Parma. I think I'm pronouncing that right, that seems right. Anyway, the year before, Parma lost 77 million euros, and now they didn't have Parmalat to back them, which meant they had to sell players, earning them the nickname the supermarket. They were facing the possibility of having to sell their training ground to raise funds. In the January transfer window, they had to make some sales, the most painful one possibly being Adriano to Inter Milan for 23.4 million euros. Inter also had some part ownership thing going on, so they actually got 15% of the fee as well. Parma would soon be declared insolvent. However, the club found a legal loophole where if they changed their name, they could still operate as a Serie A football club. On the 28th of June, they changed their name from Parma AC to Parma FC. They were put into controlled administration and they needed a new buyer desperately. However, despite all of this, they actually finished the season in 5th. No shame in that, not too bad. Who needs Champions League anyway? It's, these days it's not the main competition in Europe, is it? Who needs it? In the summer, Matteo Braihi and Matteo Ferrari went to Roma. Hideyotoshi Nakata went on loan to Fiorentina, and it wasn't just their players who left, but their manager Cesare Prandelli left as well. In his place they got in the coach Silvio Baldini, who had previously got Empoli promoted, and with a weakened side they got absolutely slaughtered. They only had 2 wins in the league by December, leaving them in 16th, and the manager was sacked. The assistant coach, Pietro Carminaghi, took charge. However, one positive from that season was their UEFA Cup form. They qualified out of their group, finishing third in a 5-team group where teams only actually played 6 games for some reason. I don't know, UEFA always changing the rules. Anyway, luckily Parma still had the goals of Alberto Ghiardino, and in part thanks to him, results picked up a bit, and in the new year they got to the UEFA Cup semi-final, but in the league they finished 17th. Good news, they're safe. No, because the 18th place team also had the same level of points. And if that happened in Serie A at the time, the teams would enter the relegation tiebreaker. And the team in 18th were their rivals, Bologna. Parma were in a perilous position. They had been put into forced administration, the club needed a new buyer, and relegation might make that impossible. Now that season Parma did actually make it to the UEFA Cup semi-final, and they had a 0-0 aggregate going into the second leg. However, with the importance of the relegation tiebreaker in mind, Parma decided to field pretty much a reserve squad in the second leg, which resulted in them getting battered 3-0 by CSKA Moscow. So in the relegation tiebreaker, the first leg ended 1-0 to Bologna, and they were away in enemy territory. Still without a buyer, staying in Serie A was important now perhaps more than ever. Parma were playing for their future, and when the second leg got underway in the 17th minute, Cardone equalised. And just before half time, Ghiardino scored his 25th goal of the season, and they won 2-1. Parma were safe. For now. However, on a sad note for Parma, Ghiardino's winning goal would be his last one for the club, as in the summer he went to AC Milan for €25 million. Parma were now without their star player who scored most of their goals, and he was also one of the best looking micro-star players as well. Yeah, if I was. And also, if I was a little mini action figure as well. Pietro the manager stood down as he was replaced by Mario Beretta, who was just sacked from fellow relegation contenders Chievo. So that's the kind of manager that Parma could attract. Anyway, Parma had an okay season. They had a 4-game winning streak in the latter half of the season, but overall it wasn't amazing, and they finished the season in 10th. But luckily this was Italy, and there's always some scandal going on. This time it was the Calciopoli scandal. So after AC Milan, Lazio, Fiorentina and Regina were docked points, Parma actually finished off the season in 7th. Yeah, it meant Parma were back in the UEFA Cup again. Yeah, that was a stroke of luck. In the summer, Italian businessman Gaetano Valenza tried to buy the club twice but failed. But there was good news, as Lorenzo Sanz, the former president of Real Madrid, who oversaw a massively successful period in Real Madrid's history, wanted to take over Parma. Parma also managed to get in Bernardo Corradi on loan from Valencia, which was nice, giving some continuity in the series here. The Lorenzo Sanz takeover bid would eventually fall through, so the search for a new owner continued. Once again, they also needed a new manager, so they looked to Serie B, and they got in former player Stefan Pioli, who had never actually managed in top tier football before. So how will he get on? Badly. They drew their first game against Torino, then lost their next 5 games, getting battered 4-0 by Roma along the way. Even Aquilani scored. That's when you know it's bad. By February, they'd only won 3 league games. They were doing great in the UEFA Cup, but they were second bottom of Serie A, with over half of the season already gone. Now they seemed doomed to relegation. However, off the pitch, Parma finally had some good news. After about 3 years in controlled administration, Parma were put up for auction, and in January they got a buyer, the 31-year-old Tommaso Ghiardi, who made his money in the mechanics industry. He bought Parma for about £39 million, or €59 million. He came in, and after 2 games he sacked Stefan Pioli. He needed a replacement, and who do you get to brighten a shite situation with no sign of light? Yes, Claudio Ranieri. What a lovely geezer. Look at him there. Claudio Ranieri had been out of management for 2 years now, and it didn't go great for him in his last job at Valencia. Check out the video on that, geezers. And like and subscribe and leave a comment, that would also be nice. But still, in the state Parma are in, he was the best manager they could have hoped to attract. So Claudio Ranieri took the job, and in a press conference he said, "I told the president and I will be telling the players, we are either going to stay up or we will die trying." He also said, if we go down, there will be no survivors, and nobody will be wounded. We will all be dead. Which, if this ever got made into a film for some reason, that's what you put in the trailer. Lovely stuff. Ranieri saw a team that played good football but weren't getting good results. And a club that plays good football but doesn't get any positive results is just pointless. Pun intended. So he switched the formation from 4-3-3 to 4-4-2. He tightened things up at the back and he got them playing more practically. He instilled confidence in the team. He got the best out of players like Giuseppe Rossi, and they ended up winning 7 out of their last 11 games and finished 12th. The Tinker Man had worked his magic. Yes, a new era for Parma. They had found their saviour. Tommaso Ghiardi approached Claudio Ranieri with a contract extension, and Claudio Ranieri said, "Nah, you're alright mate," and he went off to Juventus. So once again Parma had to go into Serie B for a manager, as they got in Domenico Di Carlo, whoever he is. Turns out he's a manager of Mantova, whoever they are. Turns out they're a club based in Mantua, wherever that is. Nevertheless, Ghiardi did spend money, as he got in not a lot of players, but he did get some in. Never heard of most of them, but apparently fans were optimistic. How would they get on? They'd get relegated. Their 19-year reign in Serie A was over. Before the end of the 2007-08 season, Parma sacked their manager again, so they appointed Luigi Cagni, and things got even worse. With 6 league games gone, they only had 1 win, and Cagni was canned. They replaced him with Francesco Gudolin, a seasoned manager who won the Coppa Italia, taken several teams to Serie A, and he came in and he did the same for Parma. They finished second and were back in the top flight. And the next season they actually kept the same manager, and Tommaso Ghiardi spent a bit in the transfer window as well. They brought in the promising midfielder Daniele Gallipola for €10 million, and they brought back club legend, football legend, Herman Crespo, whose first spell at Parma saw him score 80 goals in 4 seasons, including vital goals like one in the UEFA Cup final. As well as old legends, they looked to the future and got some great young talent like Luco Tedeschi, Ronnie Valerio, Stefano Russo, Nicola Amoroso, Stefano Krisky. Fuck me, that seems like a lot of players. Why so many? What's going on there? Well, enter the new director of football, Pietro Leonardi. Pietro Leonardi was a businessman with a long history of working in Italian football. His most recent club before coming to Parma was Udinese, who were owned by the Pozzo family. There he worked in the Udinese system of buying loads of young players and selling them on for a profit. So what he's doing at Parma makes sense now. Right. So when the season started, Parma were doing great. They outperformed everyone's expectations and they finished 8th, just missing out on a return to Europe. Lone player Valery Bornijov proved to be a surprising hit after things didn't work out at parent club FFP dodging Manchester City. He joined Parma on a permanent deal. Good mate, get out of there, the dodgy bastards. The manager Francesco Godini had done such a good job that Parma were prepared to go another season without sacking the manager. However, he did such a good job that he was actually snapped up by Udinese, so they replaced him with another geezer who sounds like a side character in The Sopranos, Pascal Mariano. It was quite an underwhelming appointment, and he did alright to start with, getting a 1-0 win in the first game, and then they didn't win for 2 months. However, results did pick up and they made some smart signings, and they even beat Juventus 4-1. However, they ended up having an 8-game winless run from January to March. Marino's job was temporarily saved by a win at Sampdoria, but the next game they'd lose to another relegation contender, Bari, and he was gone. Parma were now 2 points above the drop zone with 7 games to go. The new coach, Franco Colomba, would have his work cut out for him if he was to keep Parma safe from relegation. A 2-0 loss to Lazio wasn't a great start, but after that he did fucking brilliantly. He came in and motivated the team, and the players showed the world the team had some great talent. Acquisitions from Juventus proved to be smart signings, perhaps the best of those being loan signee Amuri, who scored 7 goals in 11 appearances. Hernan Crespo also rolled back the years, scoring 11 goals in all competitions, establishing himself as Parma's top scorer of all time. Parma won 4 of their last 6, beating Inter Milan and Juventus along the way to finishing 12th. The next season, normal service was resumed again, their form was shaky, and Colomba got sacked in January after a 5-0 beating by Inter Milan. So Roberto Donadoni came in and he did alright. They finished the season really strongly. Sebastian Giovinocci had a standout season, and Hernan Crespo ended his career. He would go on to be voted Parma's best player of all time. Parma seemed to have loads of talent ready to replace him and maybe become club greats themselves, as they were very busy in the transfer window, signing Fabio Barini, Daniele Galopa, Valerim Francesco Villani, and Pietro Baccolo. Oh no, there's more. Alessio Manzoni, Fiore, Angela Benesiviniaga, and a load of players who came in and went straight back on loan again. But nonetheless, Parma could have some cause for hope going into the 2012-13 season. The 2012-13 season, it was alright. They started well, some of their new talent turned out to be good, they beat Inter Milan, and they managed another season without sacking their manager. They finished 10th. Not too bad, not too bad. The next season would be fucking great. They got a load more players in, let a load more players go. Combined, the number of arrivals and departure in the summer of 2013 totalled 260. 260. Fuck me. Somehow, Roberto Donadoni got his team firing. They beat AC Milan twice, Napoli twice, Antonio Cassano came in and proved he could still get goals and was still very sexy. Oh, if I was. Parma had a club record 17-game unbeaten run in Serie A. They visited the Pope to see how he was getting on, and they finished 6th. In Parma's centenary year, they were once back again in Europe. Oh no, hold on. No, it turns out they're not, as UEFA failed to give them a licence due to an unpaid tax bill of €325,000. Which, you know, if I received a tax bill for that amount, I'd be shitting myself. But Parma, surely they have that money available. Surely. Well, here is where the bureaucracy and fuckery really comes in. It turns out these taxes arose from payments made to 10 players on loan in about October-November 2013. Now, the deadline for overdue payments to players or tax authorities was the 31st of March 2014. However, Parma said these payments were actually salary advances, which had a deadline at the start of the season.
They weren't able to obtain a UEFA licence because they weren't up to date on their taxes. And at the time, this was presented as Ghiardi as just a little blip.
Not everyone understands that first alarm.
They appealed to the Italian High Court of Justice for Sport, and it was ruled that these payments were salary anticipation and required payment of taxes 30 days after disbursement. So in short, Parma were fucked. And Parma would have been fucked regardless, as they didn't receive a first notice of this tax deadline until the 30th of April, a month after the deadline had already passed. However, let's not absolve the Parma ownership and back office of responsibility, as this is what happens when you sell and sign so many players that no one can keep track of what's going on. Between the summer of 2013 and the summer of 2014, Parma, between signing, sales, co-ownerships, loans, buy one, get one free, whatever bollocks Parma were doing in the transfer market, they had 450 player transactions. 450. How can anyone keep up with that much admin? Fuck me, that fax machine must have been taking a battering. The club reportedly had 250 players under contract at one point. It makes Chelsea seem modest. What is happening here? Tommaso Ghiardi and Pietro Leonardi's strategy of signing a fuckload of players and selling them on for a profit made incidents like this almost inevitable.
Dove appunto inizialmente per le sue dichiarazioni e anche per i suoi fatti tutti credevano che forse il periodo nero che aveva caratterizzato il Parma era passato. Però invece andando avanti con gli anni non è stato così, anzi forse peggio, ma molto peggio di quello che è successo con il crack Parmalat. Durante quell'anno un po' di cose ad alcuni non quadravano. Ad esempio, partendo dal numero di tesserati del Parma, quasi 300 tesserati della società del Parma ed era la società con il maggior numero di tesserati in tutta Europa.
On the 30th of May, Tommaso Ghiardi held a press conference to announce his resignation as club president on the 1st of July, and that he was putting the club up for sale. The players got together to write a heartfelt letter to urge him to stay. That sentiment by the players was about to change though, as the depth of Parma's financial situation started to come to light. Now, players at Parma would usually get paid quarterly, and this was usually fine. But as time went by, players started to check their mail and noticed that they were not getting their payments.
So ultimately he wound up with a situation where instead of this network of players supporting his club, actually they were just a massive drain on his resources, and at a certain point, essentially, he decided he didn't fancy it anymore and stopped paying the wages.
Fans would soon discover that Parma had incurred a debt of around €200 million. Missing out on Europe did mean they missed out on €8 million, but still, even in that case, €192 million in debt, that would still be pretty bad. In an attempt to raise funds, they went on a mass clear out, selling Marco Parolo to Lazio. They sold Amori, and they also sold the defender Christian Molina. They replaced them with a load of Serie B and Serie C players. This depleted Parma squad had an absolutely shite season. The whole squad looked like they were indeed actually going to be Serie B players at this rate, as they suffered defeat after defeat. After 7 games had gone by and Parma were bottom of the league, the players were having meetings with the Parma Ultras after the game. By December, with 14 league games played, they only had 6 points. And December was when the FIGC, the Italian Football Federation, I don't quite know how that abbreviation works, but anyway, that is when the FIGC gave Parma a 1-point deduction for missing a February 17th deadline to pay taxes for the months of November and December. The players also had now not been paid for a year. Tommaso Ghiardi and Pietro Leonardo were banned from football for 2 months for financial irregularities. But luckily for them, they sold the club in December to Russian Cypriot conglomerate Disastro Holdings Limited, who the public didn't really know much about, except that they are investors in the oil business. And when has that ever been sketchy? Parma was sold for an estimated 7 million euros. However, some claim they were actually in fact sold for just €1. Fuck me, that's how bad it had gotten. Anyway, Parma were bought by the consortium Disastro Holdings, and the man behind the consortium would turn out to be 43-year-old oil tycoon Rezat Taki. Maybe everything would be okay. Including unpaid salaries, they now owed 13 million euros. But that should be fine. I imagine they can pay that. They installed Emir Kodra as the new club president, and they were now linked with January signings including Marco Burillo and Inter Milan defender Hugo Campagnaro. Again, I'm really sorry about the pronunciations. There seemed to be reason for optimism going into the winter break. January came and it didn't bring new signings, it instead brought new allegations. This time it was that the owner was actually engaging in tax evasion, as 2 of his companies, Taki Oil and Amaro, had substantial tax bills. To make things worse, they were still struggling to keep players that they actually did have because they still hadn't been paid, as Antonio Cassano asked for his contract to be rescinded. After promises of payments to other players weren't kept, they also headed for the exit. And in February, so would the new owner, because when Rezat Taki took over the club, he was told that Parma were only in 70 million euros worth of debt. I say only, that's still quite a lot. But after taking over the club, he discovered it was actually a lot worse, as they were in 240 million euros worth of debt, plus another 50 million euros debt to come over the next 3 or 4 months. Yeah, that's something that you kinda want to know up front. So on the 6th of February, after only 2 months owning the club, he sold it for €1. Fucking hell, Italian pound shops must be class. The new owner was Gianpietro Minetti, who ran the Slovenian-based company Mapi Group. However, this didn't end Parma's woes. On the pitch, they couldn't buy a win. And considering it's the Italian league, that's especially bad. Minetti told players they would be getting paid, it was just getting held up by red tape. He even showed them bank documents with outlandish figures. He gave them the date of February 16 for when the players should expect to be paid. However, the date came and no payments were forthcoming. Now, just for some backstory, Minetti was actually a shabbily dressed man who drove a Citroen C3, and it turned out in the 2 years previously he'd failed to buy 2 Serie B teams, Pro Vercelli and Brescia. Furthermore, his company, the Mapi Group, well, their headquarters were just in a tiny 2-storey house in a tiny town on the Italian border. All of this is to say, Minetti might not be the man with the funds to rescue this club. To make things worse, players had to do their own laundry and drive the team bus. Not at the same time. That'd be mental. It got so bad that Parma couldn't even afford to pay the lighting bill. Needless to say, it was a dark time for the club. On the positive side though, the Parma players wouldn't have to worry about driving the team bus for much longer, as in mid-February, along with other club vehicles, benches, medical equipment and gym equipment, it was seized from Parma's training grounds due to unpaid taxes. As a result, the team's training session was cancelled. I mean, if an Italian team doesn't even have the option of parking the bus, then what's the point anyway? However, again, on the positive side, this lack of preparation wouldn't have any negative effects on Parma's next game, as the match didn't even take place. Their match against Udinese, scheduled for the 22nd of February, was actually called off, due to the club not even being able to pay their stewards.
The players had carried on playing without getting their money, but there came a point where simple administrative costs could no longer be paid. They could no longer pay to steward their home games, and they could no longer pay for the buses to get them to away games. And actually there was a brief period when the players were essentially saying, well look, even though we haven't been paid all season, we're rich enough, we can fund some of this. But it came to a head around the turn of the year when they were supposed to play Udinese at home and then Genoa away, and they basically said, we're not willing to do this. They said nobody in the Italian football hierarchy has come to help us about the fact of this situation. Everyone's just hoping that we're going to deal with it, and then we'll suffer while the people who have caused this problem get away with it. And so the only way that we can draw attention to this situation is if we say no more, we're not willing to pay these games.
Cash flow at the club was reportedly even below €40,000. Parma signed a €20,000 sponsorship deal just so they could afford travel and accommodation for their match against Genoa. However, it would all be in vain, as the players who still hadn't been paid all season asked for this game to be postponed. And if the postponement didn't happen, then they threatened to boycott the game. The Italian Football Federation agreed to a postponement. Forget not being able to buy a win, they couldn't even afford to buy a match. My word. In early March, in order for Parma to fulfil their fixture schedule and therefore not break Serie A's contract with Sky Italia, fellow Serie A clubs loaned Parma £3.6 million to help them complete the season. A week later, Parma were deducted a further 2 points for not paying the players. On the 19th of March, a bankruptcy tribunal was held for Parma. And just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, days before the tribunal, the owner, Gianpietro Manetti, was arrested on charges of money laundering and embezzlement. This was part of a nationwide raid that involved raising illicit funds through stolen credit cards. On the 19th of March, in a hearing that lasted only 10 minutes, the club was declared bankrupt, with debts announced to be $220 million. However, the Associated Press estimated that it was actually about €100 million. Safe to say, it was a lot. The club was also 16 points away from safety in the league. However, they were determined not to go down without a fight, and they somehow, amongst all the chaos, started to put some good results together. They drew with Inter Milan, and then they beat Udinese. Then they managed to pick up a shock win against the champions Juventus. Could Parma pull off the biggest Cinderella story? No, they couldn't. No, they couldn't, as they would be deducted another 4 points. After losing to Genoa, they did manage to pick up some more good results and make those 4 points back, drawing with Empoli and beating Palermo. However, a 4-0 loss to Lazio saw them relegated. However, that wasn't Parma's only fight for survival. As one battle ended, the fate of the club as a business was still in question. In order for Parma to stay alive, they needed a buyer who was willing to buy them for €22.6 million. With the deadline of the 22nd of June approaching, a few potential buyers showed interest, but they passed on the deal. One of them was former baseball player Mike Piazza, and apparently he's pretty good. Yeah, I don't watch baseball, so I'll take the internet's word for it. However, the date of the 22nd of June came and Parma was still without a buyer. Parma were dead.
In March 2015, Italian club Parma were declared bankrupt for the second time in a little over 10 years. Failure to find a new owner to relieve them of their debt saw the club disbanded at the end of the season.
But watching on was a Parma fan, an Italian businessman who was a former minority owner of the club over a decade earlier, Marco Ferrari. And he had a plan to revive Parma in the form of a new club, but sort of still the same club. But it is complicated. He got together a team of 6 investors to put up €2.5 million to reboot the team. This group of investors were called the Nuovo Inizio, which in Italian means the new beginning. These investors included Gianpaolo Dallara, who owned motorsports company Dallara, and Guido Barella, owner of a pasta company. That bloke clearly doesn't let stereotypes bother him. This group of investors realised the flaw in the traditional Italian model of owning a football club, and instead wanted to adopt the German football model where fans would have a sufficient stake in the club. This German model made sure that club spending was more responsible and that their fans could always have a say. Therefore, Marco Ferrari and his investors would own 75% of the club, and the remaining 25% would be sold to the fans. To encourage fan investment, they doubled how many shares the fans would get for their money. So if they invested €500, they'd get €1,000 worth of shares. Their plan was for fan ownership to never dip below 10%. They installed Luco Cara as the team's general manager and former Parma coach Naivo Scalia as the club's president.
It all started with a phone call I received from Parma. They said, "Coach, we need to talk to you about an important project concerning the club and a possible bankruptcy."
Marco Ferrari would serve as vice president. Because they didn't actually buy Parma, they didn't buy their trademark, so it meant they had to reform with a new name. So they were now called SSD Parma Calcio 1913. Now, Calcio is Italian for football. 1913 was the year that Parma were originally founded, and SSD has nothing to do with file transfers, but instead stands for Società Sportiva Dilettantistica. I'm probably pronouncing part of that or all of that wrong. I'll put it on the screen just in case you're wondering how it's meant to be spelt. But who gives a shit, really? As no one stepped in to buy the club's naming rights or trademark, it meant the club would not be able to register for Italian professional football, so Parma would not just be relegated to Serie B, but in fact relegated to Serie D.
Because the Parma must to start again to the Serie D.
It's actually the highest level of the semi-professional football in Italy. It's just outside the 3 professional leagues.
Relegated 2 divisions before the season's even started. Even Sunderland fans will feel sorry for these geezers. Parma were now in Serie D, the 4th tier of Italian football, which is semi-professional football in fact. They had to fight to get back to where they were. The club only had 10 staff members at the time. They could barely afford to maintain their training grounds. They had no Wi-Fi, so players had to use dongles to get the internet. Things were so bad that Taka Waikiki even tried to make a film about it. However, on the positive note, in November Parma did get their old trophies back. As Parma's situation was so bad, they had to sell their own trophies to raise funds. Fuck, Liverpool should have bid on them. I'd have counted them. I'd have gone to the open top bus parade. With Parma being liquidated, Parma's players were now free agents. Most of Parma's players understandably left for better clubs. However, someone who did stay was club captain Alessandro Lucarelli, who promised to stay at the club until they got promoted back to Serie A. What a lovely geezer.
We've restarted from the bottom, but we've done it with a new belief and a rekindled spirit.
Fans set up a crowdfunding campaign to buy shares of the club. Former club legend Luigi Apolloni was appointed as manager, and they set about their road to redemption. And they had a cracking season. Undefeated in the league, they were promoted to Serie C in first place, and the stadium attendances were even up from when they were in Serie A. The next season didn't get off to the best start, so Roberto D'Aversa was appointed the new manager, and they only went and got promoted again, this time finishing second and going up through the playoffs, which had 4 rounds to them. Fuck me, what's going on there? 4-round playoffs. Fuck me. Anyway, now they were finally back playing against teams that you could actually find on FIFA, and they had a new majority stakeholder, as Gian Liazan's sports marketing company D Sports bought 60% of the club and became the new club president. He came in and appointed Hernan Crespo as vice president. The previous majority stakeholders, the New Beginning Group, would own 30%, and the fans would still own 10% through the company Parma Participazione Cal. The name's on the screen over there. Parma would ride this wave of momentum to gain a 3rd straight promotion after a last-minute goal in the Foggia vs Frosinone game secured Parma's 2nd place finish. This was a monumental victory for the fans and everyone who stuck by the club and the team to help them get out from their darkest moment and return back to Serie A. On the pitch, this dedication was embodied best by club captain Alessandro Lucarelli, who said he would stay with the club until they got back into Serie A. He proved to be true to his word, and during the promotion party, he announced his retirement. At the age of 40, he left Parma as their record appearance maker, and he must have been relieved more than anyone to get promoted. 40 years old, must have been knackered. My word. Parma were finally back in Serie A, and they set about picking up where they left off 3 years ago, and got another points deduction. This time they were deducted 5 points after their forward, Emanuele Calaio, sent a WhatsApp message to Spezia's players ahead of them playing each other on the final day of the Serie B season. The WhatsApp message asked the Spezia players not to play too hard against Parma. Emanuele has said that these messages were sent jokingly, however Parma was still handed a 5-point deduction and given a €20,000 fine. However, the ban against the player was reduced and Parma's 5-point deduction did get overturned in August, so off we go. Parma were back in Serie A and they made some great experienced signings like Bruno Alves, Gerard Kuka and Gervinho, and they also got in some younger ones on loan like Roberto Inglesi and Federico Di Marco. And they had a decent season. They flirted with the European places, but they still ended up in 14th place. They beat Inter Milan and managed to draw 3-3 with Juventus. So, not bad, not bad. Roberto D'Aversa's pragmatic approach to working with the squad had paid off. The season wasn't completely drama-free though, as in August, the New Beginning Group had to take back 30% of the club's shares, making them the largest shareholders at the club once again. They had to do this as the New Beginning Group lost faith with D Sport's financial ability to provide for the club. After this whole dispute, the owners agreed a 3-year business plan in regards to how the club should be run, which is a nice amicable way to resolve the dispute. The next season was also pretty good. I mean, well, not for the world, because there was that whole COVID business, but apart from that, it seemed good. They spent responsibly again, they kept the faith with the manager, they had Dejan Kulusevski on loan and he did very well at the club, and they finished 11th. Nice gradual improvement. After all these years, Parma seemed like a stable club once again. Oh, hold on, they sacked their manager. 3 weeks after the Serie A season ended, they sacked Roberto Di Aversa. The club gave some very convoluted reason. It sounded like it had been written by Gwyneth Paltrow. It was very strange, but nonetheless, they'd sacked the manager. So if you're going to replace the manager who guided you back into the top tier and who'd made you a stable club, who would you replace him with? Surely it'd be someone special. Nope, they replaced him with Fabio Liverani, the manager who just got relegated with Lecce after losing to Parma of all teams on the last day of the season. They also decided to appoint him less than a month before the season began. Fabio's playing style was completely different from Roberto's as well. Well, I mean not completely different, they still, kicked the ball around to each other, played on a grass pitch, had 11 players. It was still football, but the previous manager's style was more counter-attacking and Fabio's was more possession-based. Then in September, the club was taken over again when a 90% stake was bought by a US investment group, Kraus Group. 9% would be owned by the New Beginning Group and 1% now would be owned by the fans. In the transfer market, new owner Carl J. Cruz spent €80 million in the summer, the third most in Serie A, which is good, but it does give the new coach more work to do in already quite a short period of time. Furthermore, these were young players, which of course meant that they would also need more coaching. And this came to bear on the pitch, where they lost their first 2 games. As the season went on, injuries mounted, and it left Parma with only 2 wins after 16 games, and Fabio Liverani was sacked. So the owners went, oh right, that last geezer wasn't actually that bad actually, it wasn't too bad after all. So they rehired Roberto Di Aversa. He was still under contract, so you might as well. Saves you from making new name tags, just dig out the old ones. Parma also spent a bit in the January transfer market, so this should turn their season around. Well, sadly it didn't. One of the biggest criticisms from Roberto Di Aversa's first spell at Parma was the trait of throwing away leads, and that trait followed him in his second spell. They would go on to finish bottom of the table. Parma were back in Serie B, and once again they sacked their manager. New name, same old Parma, as they seemed to be reverting to their old ways. Relegation was not in the new owner's plans, who after butting heads with the local council, finally unveiled plans for a new state-of-the-art stadium. It was eco-friendly, sustainable, promoted inclusivity, and loads of other buzzwords. It did look fantastic, but it also looked expensive, so they needed to get promoted as soon as possible. They got in Sevilla striker Franco Vasquez and club legend, well just legend in general, Gigi Buffon. He was in his mid-40s, but still, surely having this legend in the dressing room could inspire them to get automatic promotion. Well, it didn't. That season they went through 2 managers and finished in 12th. The next season they hired Fabio Paccia as manager. He was a no-nonsense coach who just got promoted with Cremonese and had a law degree. You never know when that's going to come in handy in Italian football. He came in and they had a much better season. They finished in 4th, qualifying for the playoffs. In the playoff semi-final they went 2-0 up, and then it fell apart. Parma's return to Serie A would have to wait. However, they wouldn't have to wait too much longer for their return to Serie A, as they got promoted as league champions. there could be a bright future for Parma. However, for a fan base that has seen their club suffer a financial collapse, mismanagement, points deductions, player exoduses, auctioning off of silverware, and the actual demise of their club, all in recent memory, you can be forgiven for thinking that that bright future on the horizon might just be another false dawn. Hopefully, that wasn't too wanky of an ending. Anyway, cheers for watching, please like and subscribe.